Part 29. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji-Sheng Chang. Chapter 281. Exotic Beast, Divine Snake Chaos Level 6, Level 49. Qualification, Alien, Intermediate. Life, 99999999777999999999999. Speed, 999999997779999999999. Defense, 999999997779999999999. Attack, 99999999777999999999999. Skill, unknown. I didn't expect that you, a little guy, are really capable. You can actually see it, but what can you do? You can't escape death today, but if you kneel down and beg for mercy now, I can consider letting you go. After hearing what Chu Heiran said, Lin Yu's mouth curled up a bit of sarcasm and mockery. At this time, he just shook his head with a look of contempt. This snake of the gods looks really scary, but what can you do even if it is so? Could it be that he is more terrifying than the white tiger? After Lin Yu finished speaking, his mind moved, and the white tiger appeared in front of Lin Yu. At this time, the mysterious power in the void quietly gathered together, and a tiger roar resounded through the world, moving people's souls. After seeing this scene, Chu Heiran's eyes were full of disbelief. At this time, his eyes were fixed on Lin Yu, and then he shook his head frantically. Impossible, this is absolutely impossible, how could you have a white tiger? At this time, Lin Yu suddenly laughed, and his eyes were full of mockery. Why can't I have a white tiger? Of course, the white tiger is impressed by my wisdom and bravery. Don't you think so, little tiger? Lin Yu turned his head and glanced at the white tiger. There was a hint of teasing in his eyes, and a faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. At this time, the white tiger was speechless, but Lin Yu was his master after all, and the white tiger could not dismantle Lin Yu in front of Chu Heiran. So at this time, the white tiger just smiled and said, "That's right. Looking at your underdeveloped little snake, you'd better take it back quickly, otherwise it might not be enough for drinking and eating later." After Chu Heiran heard what the white tiger said, he was furious. He let out a low roar and a cold light flashed in his eyes. "Assholes, dare to look down on my god snake, if I don't kill you today, I can't get rid of the hatred in my heart." After Chu Heiran finished speaking, he suddenly rushed towards the white tiger and Lin Yu, and the god snake bit the white tiger. The white tiger suddenly pounced forward, and then bit the god snake. At this moment, the god snake didn't even move, and just stayed straight in place. He turned his head and just glanced at the white tiger lightly, with a bit of disdain in his eyes. After seeing this scene, Behu was furious, but at this moment, he suddenly realized that something was wrong. It turned out that a trace of blood was flowing out from the corner of Behu's mouth. The Behu felt a pain in his mouth, and then he quickly let go of the snake of the gods. After seeing this scene, Chu Heiran's smile at the corner of his mouth began to become more and more obvious. At this time, he stared at Lin Yu with a smug look. "What's up? Weren't you arrogant just now? Why are you in such a mess now? It's ridiculous, ridiculous." After seeing this scene, Lin Yu's face was slightly condensed, and then he turned his head and looked at Behu. "What's going on?" The corner of Behu's mouth raised a bitter smile. "This guy's body is full of barbs." At this moment, after hearing what Behu said, Lin Yu instantly understood what was going on. A cold light flashed in his eyes, and the murderous intent on his body was quietly revealed. "It doesn't matter, you just need to wrap your tail around its 7 inches. Everyone knows that you should hit the snake at its 7 inches, and the white tiger nodded slightly. "Okay, everything is up to you." At this time, the white tiger suddenly rushed forward, and his speed was extremely fast. In just a breath, he came directly in front of the divine snake. The white tiger opened his bloody mouth and suddenly bit the divine snake directly. At this time, the divine snake was suddenly bitten by the white tiger, and it let out a shrill scream, and then the whole huge body began to twist desperately. At this moment, the divine snake was seen struggling back and forth desperately. At this time, the face of the young man in white was obviously pale. After seeing this scene, Lin Yu raised the corners of his mouth slightly, showing a bit of evil confusion. Finally, he turned his head, his eyes fixed on the young man in white, and there was a bit of mockery in his eyes. "How's it going? Are you satisfied with my reception this time?" After the young man in white heard what Lin Yu said, a bit of gloom flashed in his eyes. At this time, his eyes were like this, staring at Lin Yu with a smile on his lips. A bit of a sneer. "Very good, very good. I really admire you for being so arrogant. If that's the case, then I'll send you on your way." At this moment, Lin Yu couldn't understand at all why the young man in white still dared to shout at him like this, so at this moment, there was a bit of gloominess in his eyes, and the murderous intention on his body just quietly appeared. Emerged. At this moment, Lin Yu suddenly rushed straight away, and the two sides fought directly. It was hard to separate, and it was hard to separate. Even the surrounding space was faintly blurred under the attacks of both sides. They all feel like they are about to be broken. Lin Yu's face instantly became ugly, but a moment later, he suddenly smiled because he could clearly feel that Chu Heiran's aura began to weaken rapidly. "Interesting, it's really interesting. Even I don't know what you rely on? Why do you dare to yell at me like this? Could it be that you really want to seek death?" Lin Yu's tone was very gloomy and cold, and the coldness in his eyes became more and more obvious. At this time, after hearing what Lin Yu said, the boy in white also had a look at the corner of his mouth. It evoked a bit of a sneer. "Why, you don't deserve to know. You don't think the snake of gods is that simple." At this moment, the white tiger suddenly bit into pieces the body of the divine snake. The divine snake instantly fell to the ground. At this moment, the white tiger looked at Lin Yu with a proud face, as if it's the same as Lin Yu's request for credit. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 282. After seeing this scene, Lin Yu's eyes flashed with a bit of gloom. At this moment, he frowned slightly, and then a bit of gloom flashed in the corners of his eyes and brows. The coldness. After waiting for this moment, the body of the divine snake, which was originally in a state of disrepair in the void, was slowly pieced together like this. After Lin Yu saw this scene, a bit of surprise flashed in his eyes. At this moment, his brows suddenly knitted together, and a look of disbelief flashed in his eyes. At this moment, the young man in white suddenly took advantage of the moment of being distracted by the rain and punched Lin Yu directly in the face. At this time, Lin Yu didn't react at all, and was directly hit by the young man in white. The young man in white let out an angry roar. In just a short moment, Lin Yu had already come to Lin Yu again. Yu Shen came forward. Lin Yu subconsciously pulled away and took a few steps back, but no matter how many steps Lin Yu took back, the young man in white would always take a few steps forward like a maggot attached to his bones. At this time, Lin Yu's face began to gradually become pale, and there was a special color in the corners of his eyes and eyebrows. Then he took a deep breath and calmed down his mood a little. "It's interesting, it's really interesting. It seems that you are quite capable, but so what? This is far from enough." After Lin Yu finished speaking, with a thought in his mind, a sword suddenly appeared in Lin Yu's palm. At this moment, a burst of dragon roars echoed through the sky, and even the divine snake in the void. At this time, there was actually a slight mistake. Lin Yu wiped away the blood from the corner of his mouth and stared coldly at Chu Heiran in front of him. Chu Heiran never expected that Lin Yu's strength would be so terrifying. He turned his head and stared directly at Lin Yu. The two people looked at each other, and they seemed to be bursting into the void. There was a burst of intense sparks. After a moment, Lin Yu suddenly moved. He suddenly rushed forward. His speed was extremely fast, and he drew an afterimage in the air, and then followed. Then he suddenly attacked Chu Heiran's face. Chu Heiran subconsciously turned slightly to the side, but he barely dodged Lin Yu's oncoming blow. But just a moment later, the sound of breaking through the air suddenly came over, and then Lin Yu continued to move backwards. After retreating for a long time, he could barely stabilize his body. In just a moment, Lin Yu's eyes were quite solemn. Although Chu Heiran was suppressed by Lin Yu for a moment. But at this time, Lin Yu was very aware of the current situation. Chu Heiran probably had a divine snake behind him, which was not an ordinary thing. Every time the snake of gods is shattered by the white tiger, it can always be condensed again in this brief moment. After seeing this scene, Lin Yu took a deep breath and calmed down his mood a little. He suddenly rushed straight ahead. In just this brief moment, Lin Yu stood up in the air. And just after this moment, the snake of gods began to twist its huge body desperately. At this time, Lin Yu and Baihu discovered that every time the snake of gods was crushed, its figure would become larger than that of the snake. I have to grow up a bit before. After Lin Yu and Baihu saw this scene, their pupils suddenly enlarged, and a bit of solemnity flashed in their eyes. At this time, Lin Yu also had a bit of a wry smile on his lips, and there was a look of helplessness in the corners of his eyes and brows. What to do now? After Baihu heard what Lin Yu said, he was stunned. He shook his huge tiger head, and then the look of helplessness in his eyes and between his eyebrows began to change. Become more obvious. This guy should be an immortal body, guarding this platform of reincarnation, and this immortal body, presumably he drank the water of the river of fame, but the water of the river of fame is extremely poisonous. I really don't know how did this guy survive. After Lin Yu heard what Baihu said, a helpless smile appeared on the corner of his mouth, and his eyes were full of helplessness. What should we do if this happens? After Lin Yu heard Baihu say this, he frowned slightly, and a bit of surprise flashed in his eyes. After waiting for this moment, Baihu seemed to suddenly remember something, and a faint smile suddenly appeared on the corner of Shi's mouth. After Lin Yu saw this scene, he was even more excited at this time. His head was full of confusion, and he had no idea why Baihu suddenly smiled like this. What are you laughing at? It's very simple. I remembered an interesting thing. Since he is immortal, he should also feel pain. But just now, he didn't look at all in pain, and this guy's speed is a bit abnormal. If the water of the Styx is absorbed by the body of an alien beast, it will evolve into the illusion realm. After hearing what Baihu said, Lin Yu half closed his eyes, a complex look flashed in his eyes, and then he raised his eyebrows slightly. Illusionary realm. Baihu nodded gently, and at this time, the young man in white outside the illusion suddenly had an ominous premonition in his heart after seeing this scene. Especially, when the young man in white heard Baihu and Lin Yu talking about the illusionary realm, his whole face was full of solemnity. After waiting for this moment, the young man in white suddenly pinched his hands and chanted a spell, and then a violent and fierce momentum rushed out of the young man in white like this. A mysterious power between heaven and earth seemed to make people feel a little unfathomable. After waiting for this moment, Lin Yu also took a deep breath and calmed down his mood a little. When the heart is settled, it is the same, and when the heart moves, all things come to life. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 283. After Lin Yu finished speaking, he suddenly opened his eyes. A cold light flashed in his eyes, and then he saw the space around him falling like broken glass. After the illusion of the young man in white was broken, he spurted out a mouthful of blood. Lin Yu held the dragon roar sword and chopped at the young man in white. The young man in white subconsciously mentioned the god snake. As a defense against the god snake, although it was an immortal existence in his illusion, it was inevitable that it would fall in reality. At this time, the young man in white saw that his situation was over. After seeing this scene, his face suddenly became ugly, and then he fled to the distance. At this time, Lin Yu looked at the back of the young man in white, and a sneer appeared on the corner of his mouth. There was a cold light in his eyes, and the murderous intent on his body invaded, and there was a gloomy color in the corners of his eyes and eyebrows. "It's too late to escape now," Lin Yu said slowly, and then suddenly rushed towards the young man in white. It was just a moment, and he came behind the young man in white. Then the dragon roar sword stabbed at the back of the young man in white. At this time, the young man in white no longer had any field battles, and at this time he had no choice but to perish. The body of the young man in white collapsed limply, and Lin Yu slowly took back the dragon roar sword in his hand, and a sneer appeared on the corner of his mouth. At this time, the white tiger seemed to have sensed something strange. He turned his head and looked at Lin Yu. He could clearly sense the murderous intent in Lin Yu, which seemed to be difficult to control, and attack so crazily. A solemn look flashed across the white tiger's brows. He turned his head and glanced at Lin Yu. "Are you okay?" At this time, after hearing what the white tiger said, Lin Yu suddenly laughed. He turned his head and looked at the white tiger, and then raised his eyebrows slightly. "I'm fine, what can happen to me?" Although the white tiger heard Lin Yu say this, his eyes were still fixed on Lin Yu, but the murderous intent in you is becoming more and more violent now. "Are you really sure you can control it?" The white tiger's eyes were fixed on Lin Yu, and at this time, the white tiger could clearly see that Lin Yu's eyes were actually showing a blood-red color. After waiting for a while, the white tiger seemed to have sensed something, and a strange color flashed in the corners of his eyes and eyebrows. At this time, Lin Yu suddenly laughed directly. His laugh was very strange and looked a little scary. The white tiger glanced at Lin Yu, and his eyes were quite solemn. "What do you mean? What do you mean? Since you have seen it, if I continue to let you live this time, it will be a very bad thing for me." At this time, Lin Yu in front of the white tiger said softly and slowly, and the smile at the corner of his mouth became more and more obvious. The white tiger wanted to return to Lin Yu's sea of consciousness, but for some reason, he suddenly found that he could not go back. "What do you want to do?" At this time, Lin Yu's movements became a little different from before. He turned his head and glanced at the white tiger, and the smile at the corner of his mouth began to become more and more obvious. "What do you think? What do you think I want to do now? Guess, if you guess right, I can make you die a quick death." At this time, Beihu suddenly realized that even Lin Yu's tone of voice had changed a little. Lin Yu's tone of voice at this moment actually had a bit of feminine feeling. At this time, Beihu's face suddenly sank. He suddenly stepped forward, and then a tiger roar came out of his mouth. But Lin Yu at this time was not moved at all. "Little guy, your tiger roar can indeed shake other people's souls, but don't you see the strength of my soul? Now the entire netherworld is my soul, how can you shake me?" Lin Yu said slowly. After hearing what Lin Yu said, Beihu took a deep breath. "So the two people you sent out just to induce Lin Yu's mind, you just want him to fall into your trap step by step, right?" At this moment, the Lord of the Netherworld also laughed like this, and at this time he stared at Beihu with a bit of mockery in his eyes. "Ha ha ha, interesting, interesting, I didn't expect that you, a stupid tiger, really have a brain. What you said is indeed true. Those two people just wanted him to fall into my trap." At this time, Beihu heard the Lord of the Netherworld say this, and his eyes were a little cold, and the murderous intent on his body quietly emerged. Okay, this time you are cruel. White Tiger wanted to retreat, but the Lord of the Netherworld just waved his hand lightly, and White Tiger was locked up by an invisible space barrier. I just need a mount, and I am in a good mood today, so I can give you a chance. If you surrender to me, I will spare your life. Otherwise, I will definitely kill you. At this moment, the Lord of the Netherworld said to White Tiger in a cold voice, and White Tiger raised his forehead very high at this time, his eyes stared at the Lord of the Netherworld, and a sneer appeared at the corner of his mouth. You still want to bind me? It's just a foolish dream. Today I can put my words here, don't even think about it, I will surrender to you. At this time, White Tiger said in a cold voice, his eyes were full of unwillingness, and his proud forehead was raised high. When the Lord of the Underworld saw the White Tiger like this, a cold murderous intent flashed in his eyes, and his eyes were fixed on the White Tiger. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 284. Have you really decided not to surrender to me? You have to know the price of rejecting me, but it's your life. Today I can give you a chance to think about it clearly. After Baihu heard what the Lord of the Netherworld said, he suddenly smiled like this, don't forget, I am a great holy beast. If you dare to kill me, you will definitely be punished by God. Now let's see if you are strong enough to withstand this disaster. White Tiger's eyes stared coldly at the Lord of the Netherworld. After hearing what Baihu said, the Lord of the Netherworld's pupils suddenly enlarged, and a gloomy look flashed in his eyes. Ha 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 ha, it's interesting. It's really interesting. This is the Netherworld. In this Netherworld, I dare not say anything else. But one thing I know very well is that I am the one who is here. One side of the world. So do you think I will be afraid of heaven's punishment? The Lord of the Netherworld's eyes were fixed on Baihu's body. At this time, Baihu suddenly felt a bit of an ominous premonition in his heart. He turned his head and stared at the Lord of the Netherworld. His face suddenly sank. Really? If that's the case, why not just take a look and see what your strength is? The Lord of the Netherworld just stared at the White Tiger coldly. For just a moment, the two people's eyes met at one point. The Lord of the Netherworld seemed to be unable to stand the provocation of the White Tiger. The Lord of the Netherworld let out an angry roar, and then he stretched out his hand, preparing to slash forward. At this time, the palm of the Lord of the Netherworld stopped in mid-air and could no longer wave it. After the Lord of the Netherworld saw this scene, a look of disbelief flashed in his eyes. At this time, his brows seemed to be condensed together. Asshole, why is it like this, why is it like this? At this time, the White Tiger saw Lin Yu and forcefully squeezed out a few words from his mouth, run away. At this time, Baihu was naturally very moved in his heart. When the Lord of the Netherworld saw this scene, he laughed out loud. At this time, he had a rather firm look in his eyes. Asshole, I will kill you, no doubt. Ha ha ha, but the showmanship of the two of you is really touching, so I decided to devour you bit by bit first, and then kill this stupid tiger again. After the Nether Lord finished speaking, he suddenly rushed towards the depths of Lin Yu's soul. At this time, when he had just arrived at the center of Lin Yu's sea of consciousness, the Nether Lord the Lord's pupils suddenly enlarged, and his eyes were filled with an unbelievable look. At this time, the Lord of the Netherworld wanted to withdraw quickly, because after he saw the eyes of the 10 golden dragons, he knew that Lin Yu's identity must be extraordinary. And at this moment, a golden dragon suddenly rushed towards the Lord of the Netherworld and chased after him. The golden dragon's tone was very cold, and there was a bit of coldness in its eyes. Little guy, why are you running away in such a hurry? Don't you want to devour this little guy's soul? You can't achieve your goal by running away like this. The 10 golden dragons surrounded the Lord of the Netherworld like this, with a hint of mockery in the corners of their eyes and brows. At this time, the corners of the Lord of the Netherworld's lips evoked a bit of a wry smile. He looked around. Take a look at it like this. Please show your noble hands. I don't care about the faults of small people, so you should let me go. I didn't know that you are here, and you don't have eyes to see Mount Tai. Please calm down. You're here now. If I don't ask you to stay here forever, I'm sorry. We are 10 brothers, the spirit of the dragon, and we will protect our Lord forever, so you should just accept death. Although the Lord of the Netherworld looked at the 10-headed dragon spirits with terror, his face began to look much uglier at this moment. After a while, he also realized that the dragon spirits would not let him go, so his expression started to become ferocious. If that's the case, then let's all die together. There was just a hint of sneer at the corner of the dragon spirit's mouth, and then he shook his head. You are not worthy of dying with us. After the Lord of the Netherworld heard what the dragon spirit said, he almost spit out a mouthful of old blood. However, he still took a deep breath at this moment and calmed down his mood a little. Then, his eyes immediately opened. Just staring straight at the dragon spirit, a smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. Although you are very powerful, but so what? Don't forget, I am not a vegetarian either. After the Lord of the Netherworld finished speaking, his figure was beaten dozens of times, and then the power of heaven and earth that had been sterilized by the Netherworld in the void suddenly poured in crazily towards the body of the Lord of the Netherworld. At this moment, the aura of the Lord of the Netherworld was much stronger than before, and his eyes were staring straight at the 10 dragon spirits. These 10 are guardian spirits. After seeing this scene, their faces became a little solemn. They looked at each other, and then a guardian spirit suddenly flashed to the side of the Lord of the Netherworld. He used his body to forcibly entangle the Lord of the Netherworld and kill him. But at this time, the corner of the mouth of the Lord of the Netherworld just raised a few sneers, and his eyes were full of mockery. It's so ridiculous that you want to show off your skills in front of me with such a trivial skill. After the Lord of the Netherworld finished speaking, he suddenly exerted his strength, and he flashed and broke free from the guardian spirit, and then in his palm, there was suddenly a ball of dark light as black as ink. The corner of the mouth of the Lord of the Netherworld raised a cold smile, and then he threw the ball of light directly out. After the guardian spirit saw this scene, he suddenly had a bad feeling in his heart. He didn't dare to be depressed for a moment, so he turned sideways and ran away. A black hole as dark as ink suddenly appeared in the original place. After the guardian spirit saw this scene, his heart sank slightly. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 285. At this moment, the several guardian spirits, after seeing this scene, looked at each other. You look at me, I look at you, and the corners of their eyes and eyebrows reveal a sense of shock. Naturally, they are also filled with emotion at this moment. Extremely. Brother, this guy seems to be quite capable. If we keep going like this, I'm afraid we won't be able to get any benefits from him. What should we do now? After the guardian spirit heard what his second brother said, a strange light flashed in his eyes, and then he frowned slightly. He just sighed quietly, and the corner of his mouth bien also evoked a bit of a wry smile. I can't say much about the current situation, but I can't just let it go. Let me find a solution. After the boss finished speaking, he directly entered the clouds, and then he saw a bright glow in the void. The power of witchcraft suddenly moved towards one place and gathered quietly. A moment later, a burst of thunder was heard in the void, followed by a line of colorful thunder, which suddenly hit the Lord of the Netherworld. But this ball of colorful thunder entered the body of the Lord of the Netherworld, as if it had disappeared into the sea without a trace. After everyone saw this scene, their eyes were full of disbelief. At this time, their pupils suddenly enlarged, and the corners of their eyes and brows all showed a look of disbelief. After waiting for this moment, the Lord of the Netherworld actually burped. At this time, he saw the Lord of the Netherworld, looking at them with a smile on his face, with a kind of contempt in the corners of his eyes and eyebrows. I originally thought you guys were somewhat capable, but now it seems like it's nothing more than that. At this moment, the 10 guardian spirits realized that they might have encountered a tough situation this time, but these guardian dragon spirits were not vegetarians. These guardian spirits looked at each other, and then they used their bodies as witnesses to form a 10UN formation beside the Lord of the Netherworld. At this moment, you can see that a mysterious power is gathering around them. Different from ordinary spiritual power, the spiritual power around them seems to be dozens of times richer than this ordinary spiritual power. That's not all. After seeing this scene, the Lord of the Netherworld couldn't help but have a look of solemnity in his eyes, but a moment later, a sneer appeared on the corner of the Lord of the Netherworld's lips. It's just a small skill, how dare you try to do the same thing? Since you are determined to bring humiliation and hardship on yourselves, then if I don't succeed today, you will not be able to explain it at all. The Lord of the Netherworld, who was seen at this time, suddenly waved his hand gently in front of him, and then immediately followed by the 10UN formation formed by these dragon spirits, he was instantly struck by a colorful thunder. Rout. For some reason, the boss could feel that this thunder was much more powerful than the one he had just released. The power of devouring can swallow the world and everything. This must be the devouring curse seal among the 6 curse seals. After the boss said this, some special brilliance flashed in the eyes of these dragons at the same time. After waiting for this moment, these 10 dragons felt an unprecedented pressure. At this moment, after seeing this scene, the Lord of the Netherworld also had a somewhat mocking smile on his lips. At this moment, he could be seen laughing, as if he had completely fallen into madness. How's it going? This little guy is dead. It doesn't have any impact on you anyway. If you don't come here now, you should come to me. I can guarantee that as long as you come to me, your future will be limitless. After hearing what the Lord of the Netherworld said, these 10 guardian spirits only sneered slightly at the corners of their mouths. It's just you, you're not worthy. At this moment, after hearing what Lao San said, the Lord of the Netherworld was also furious. His body grew instantly, and then he directly grabbed Lao San. At this moment, Lao San's body began to slowly ooze. With all the blood on it, it looked quite a bit ferocious and terrifying. After the boss saw this scene, he let out a dragon roar in his mouth, and then suddenly flew out towards the 3rd child. At this moment, Lao San only struggled slightly for a few times, and then a powerful force controlled Long Yuan. The boss ducked to the side of the 3rd child, staring directly at the Lord of the Netherworld. At this time, the Lord of the Netherworld casually grabbed the boss in his palm. At this time, I just want to crush them both hard. But at this moment, Lin Yu suddenly flashed out. In just one breath, in just a moment, he had already arrived at the side of the Lord of the Netherworld. At this moment, Lin Yu saw a long sword coming quietly from behind, and a dragon's roar penetrated the sky, followed by a roar of tigers. The white tiger and the long sword rushed towards the Netherworld at the same time. Host. The original Lord of the Netherworld didn't take them seriously. Even though he was in Lin Yu's sea of consciousness, the Lord of the Netherworld still didn't take them seriously. But when the white tiger's claws broke through this barrier, and when Lin Yu flashed in front of him, the Lord of the Underworld saw this scene, his pupils suddenly enlarged, and his eyes were full of disbelief. The long sword directly cut his throat, and the white tiger swallowed his head directly. At this time, the eldest and the 3rd were also released at the same time, but at this time, in full view of the public, the Lord of the Underworld actually grew ahead again. The Lord of the Underworld half squinted his eyes and stared at Lin Yu, with a gloomy murderous intent flashing in his eyes. Little guy, you really have some skills. This really surprised me, but even so, what can I do? If I want to kill you, you will die even if you don't want to. After the Lord of the Underworld finished speaking, he suddenly waved his hand heavily, and then a black breath directly enveloped Lin Yu and the white tiger, and Lin Yu's face suddenly became ugly. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 286. At this time, Lin Yu and Bai Hu could feel a strong suction force, as if it wanted to suck all their blood out of their bodies. At this time, his face began to become ugly little by little, and there was a sense of helplessness in the corners of his eyes and eyebrows. At this moment, Bai Hu saw this scene, and his mouth was full of smiles. His eyes were staring straight at Lin Yu, and a murderous intention spread quietly. At this time, a cold sweat broke out on Lin Yu's forehead. At this time, he was indeed frightened by the momentum emanating from the Lord of the Netherworld. After waiting for this moment, Lin Yu felt that all the strength in his body seemed to be completely drained. The 10 dragon spirits looked at Lin Yu at the same time, and they looked at each other at this time. What's going on? How could this guy be so terrifying? There must be something strange about this matter. These dragon orders kept discussing. At this moment, in Lin Yu's mind, a huge bell suddenly rushed towards the Lord of the Netherworld. The Lord of the Netherworld didn't even have time to react, and the big bell swallowed him completely. The Lord of the Netherworld had an unbelievable look in his eyes and eyebrows. At this time, he began to desperately use his strength to completely smash the giant bell, but no matter how hard he tried, the giant bell didn't move at all. At this time, let alone the Lord of the Netherworld, even the 10 dragon spirits that guarded Lin Yu's soul were completely stunned after seeing this scene. The dragon spirits looked at each other, and their eyes were full of disbelief. What on earth is going on? What on earth is going on? It's unbelievable, it's really too unbelievable. How could such a thing happen in the world? Yes, it stands to reason that such a rare treasure exists, and it doesn't make sense for us to not know about it, and it doesn't make sense that we are still in the dark until now. At this time, they were talking and looking at each other, just like a monk who was completely confused, not knowing what was going on. And this is not over yet. The Lord of the Netherworld felt that the power around him was slowly being swallowed by the mouth of drama. At this moment, Lin Yu only felt that his mind was in a trance. At this time, he tried his best to wake up, but for some reason he couldn't wake up. As the power in the Lord of the Netherworld's body was slowly swallowed by the mouth of drama, the Lord of the Netherworld's body gradually became smaller, and the giant bell actually became a little more solid, and there were also several very special patterns on it. After waiting for this moment, Lin Yu felt as if a special force was poured into his mind, and he woke up instantly. When Lin Yu saw that there was only a black curse seal in front of him, he began to think carefully and recall what had just happened. Arya, what happened just now? Do you know? After hearing what Lin Yu said, Arya's eyes clearly flashed with confusion, and then shook his head. I'm sorry, Master, because you were unconscious just now, my consciousness can't see anything, so. After hearing what Arya said, Lin Yu just waved his hand casually, and then a few special colors flashed in his eyes. In this case, then well, it's really a ghost. What's going on? Lin Yu was like a monk who was at a loss, and he didn't understand what happened at all. And just after this moment, a figure flashed in front of Lin Yu. Who else could it be but Bai Hu? At this time, Lin Yu turned his head and looked at Bai Hu. He pointed at the curse seal floating in the void, and a bit of confusion flashed in his eyes. Do you know what's going on? After hearing what Lin Yu said, Bai Hu opened his mouth to say something, but at this moment he only felt his mind shaken, and then he forgot what he wanted to say just now. Bai Hu shook his huge tiger head. Master, I don't know what happened just now, Please forgive me. After Lin Yu heard what Beihu said, he gently patted Beihu's huge head, and then shook his head and smiled. It's okay, it's okay, it's not a big deal, it's not a big deal. At this time, Lin Yu was also very curious about this curse seal, and then he stretched out his hand and gently grabbed the curse seal. Then, Lin Yubian felt a sense of desolation and wildness. His expression suddenly became ugly, and then he began to shake his head frantically. What's going on? How can there be such a strong power? What is such a strong power? Such a strong power, so painful. Lin Yu's words were trembling. At this time, he shook his head desperately, and his eyes and eyebrows were full of pain. After a while, Lin Yu let out an angry roar. At this time, Lin Yu looked like an angry beast. After seeing this scene, Baihu's eyes and eyebrows were full of disbelief. He really couldn't believe that Lin Yu would suffer such pain at this moment. At this time, Baihu suddenly took a step forward, and then came to Lin Yu's side. He looked at Lin Yu with concern. How is it? Are you okay? Lin Yu waved his hand, but this hand accidentally touched Baihu's body. At this time, Baihu only felt that the soul power in his body was gathering towards Lin Yu's body little by little. Baihu's face was suddenly shocked. At this time, his eyes were full of disbelief. He couldn't believe that Lin Yu was actually devouring his power. Baihu roared desperately, it's me, Lin Yu. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 287. At this time, the white tiger began to shout Lin Yu's name desperately, but at this moment, Lin Yu seemed to be unable to hear anything, and still began to desperately devour the white tiger's power. At this time, after Baihu shouted for a moment, he could clearly feel that Lin Yu's power devouring him seemed to be weakening. At this time, Lin Yu's blood-colored eyes actually regained a trace of clarity. After a while, Lin Yu suddenly withdrew his arm. He turned his head and glanced at Baihu, and opened his mouth, "Stay away from me." Baihu finally broke free from Lin Yu's control. Although he was very curious about what happened just now, at this time he could only listen to what Lin Yu said. The white tiger's figure suddenly moved backwards, retreating so quickly. After a brief moment, the white tiger looked at Lin Yu from a distance. At this moment, countless black auras began to appear on Lin Yu's body. Then Lin Yu's body suddenly exploded, and Lin Yu's body became the cold light that filled the sky, and at the end, it suddenly condensed into one place again. At this time, the white tiger's eyes were staring straight at Lin Yu. After a moment, he seemed to suddenly remember something, and he actually started to shake his huge tiger head. Impossible? How could this happen by such a coincidence? The one on Lin Yu shouldn't be the devouring curse seal. However, seeing Lin Yu's fortune along the way, even the white tiger, a strange beast that dominates the world, felt very emotional in his heart. A moment later, after experiencing 99,999 body explosions and solidifications, Lin Yu no longer even felt anything about the explosion of his body and soul. At this time, Lin Yu slowly recovered his body, and then quietly opened his eyes. At this moment, he saw that the originally dim netherworld around him actually recovered for a while. Qingming. After seeing this scene, Lin Yu's eyes clearly flashed with excitement. Great, simply great. At this time, with a thought in his mind, he directly summoned the white tiger to his side. When Baihu came to Lin Yu's side, he let out a tiger roar, seeming to express his dissatisfaction with Lin Yu's actions just now. Lin Yu remembered what had just happened, so at this time he just shook his head and smiled. Why are you so angry with me? You can't blame me for what happened just now, no. When Baihu heard Lin Yu say this, 3 black lines appeared on his forehead, and he was speechless for a while. At this time, he let out a low roar. At this time, after Lin Yu saw this scene, a faint smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. He just waved his hand gently towards the front, and then followed up with 2 long swords. Fly straight in from this netherworld. At this time, Lin Yu was holding a white longsword in his left hand and a black longsword in his right hand. He nodded with satisfaction. It is indeed the legendary nether sword. It is indeed extremely powerful. At this time, Lin Yu just knocked lightly, followed by a crisp sword sound, and directly summoned a killer whale. The killer whale came directly in front of Lin Yu and lay down on Lin Yu's body. In front of him, in the corners of his eyes and brows, there was a complete sense of submission from a Jinchi. Lin Yu sat directly on it, and the white tiger followed beside the tiger-headed spirit. At this moment, Lin Yu looked like the late emperor above the sky. He looked so majestic and domineering. And at this moment, above the sky, an old man looked over from top to bottom. When he saw this scene, a special light flashed in the corners of his eyes and eyebrows. At this time, the old man's face darkened slightly, and then the old man seemed to have thought of something and then swooped down like this. At this time, the old man was riding a green bull. The old man came directly in front of Lin Yu, his eyes staring straight at Lin Yu, with some complicated meanings flashing in his eyes. At this time, Lin Yu also looked up and saw the old man. At this time, Lin Yu stared directly at the old man, with a bit of complexity flashing in his eyes. I wonder where the old man is going. At this moment, after hearing what Lin Yu said, the old man's eyes flashed with some complicated meanings, and then he sighed heavily. Little guy, listen to my old advice. Where did it come from? Go back, don't go any further. After Lin Yu heard what the old man said, it was naturally impossible for him to be as pretentious as he said. After all, he had gone through all kinds of hardships and almost died several times. If he went back like this now, what would he have done before? Isn't the effort in vain? So at this time, Lin Yu just smiled. I dare to ask the old senior, why do you say that? It's probably not easy to ask me to go back now. At this time, after the old man heard what Lin Yu said, a special color flashed in his eyes. Why? Because this junior has something that must be done. At this time, Lin Yu turned around and stared directly at the old man, with a special color flashing in his eyes. At this time, after the old man heard what Lin Yu said, something strange flashed between his eyebrows. A moment later, he also sighed faintly. Oh, you, the front is dangerous. Abnormal, if you go through like this, your only fate will be death. The old man's eyes were staring straight at Lin Yu, with a rather gloomy look in his eyes. At this time, after Lin Yu heard what the old man said, something flashed through his eyes. There was a special brilliance, and then he sighed heavily. Oh, if you persist in your stubbornness, then I will have no choice but to force you to stay here. There was a certain determination in the old man's eyes, and it didn't look like he was joking with Lin Yu. At this time, after Lin Yu heard what the old man said, the corner of his mouth suddenly curled up like this. A bit of a sneer. Senior, if you say that, then the two of us really have to have a good fight. Senior, please. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 288. Alien Beast, Blue Bull Chaos Level 8, Level 49. Qualification, Alien, Intermediate. Life, 99999999777999999999999. Speed, 9999997779999999999. Defense, 999999997779999999999. Attack, 9999997779999999999. Skill, unknown. After seeing this scene, Lin Yu's eyes flashed with a bit of solemnity. At this time, he half squinted his eyes, and a faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. After the old man saw the white tiger next to Lin Yu, there was no trace of fear on his face. He stared at Lin Yu with a smile on his face, and a somewhat gloomy look flashed in his eyes. "Little guy, believe me, I have no intention of harming you. If you continue to persist in your obsession, you will only end up dead in the end." After hearing what the old man said, Lin Yu's eyes clearly flashed with confusion. "I don't believe what you said. Stop talking nonsense. If you insist on stopping me, then I can only declare war on you." After Lin Yu finished speaking, he suddenly took a step forward. At this time, when the old man heard what Lin Yu said, after seeing how determined Lin Yu was, a cold light flashed in his eyes, and a sneer appeared at the corner of his mouth. "Little guy, since you are like this, if you want to die this time, I will help you." After the old man finished speaking, he patted the green cow gently. After seeing this, the green bull's eyes flashed a bit of gloom. At this time, the white tiger's lips curled up into a sneer, and he let out a tiger roar. And the green bull also let out a low groan. The white tiger suddenly rushed towards the green bull. His speed was extremely fast. In just a moment, he had already arrived at the green bull's side, and then opened the door with a bloody mouth. He bit Qing Niu directly. But at this moment, the green bull actually refused to dodge, letting the white tiger bite him. After a while, the white tiger felt as if he was biting a green mountain. The green bull suddenly swung its body, and then immediately threw the white tiger away. At this time, the white tiger fell heavily to the ground. The white tiger's face showed a look of unwillingness, and he let out a low roar, which seemed to be threatening King Niu. At this time, Qing Niu was not to be outdone. The two sides fought each other like this. After Lin Yu saw this scene, his eyes were quite complicated. At this time, he couldn't help but frown slightly. Strange, why is this green cow so weird? At this time, the old man was also shaking the floating dust and rushing directly towards Lin Yu. The corner of the old man's mouth curled up into a sneer, and his eyes were full of mockery. At this moment, after Lin Yu saw the old man's smile, he didn't know why, but a somewhat ominous premonition suddenly appeared in his heart. At this time, he also frowned slightly. "It seems like you are well prepared." The old man laughed like this at that time. "Ha ha ha, I didn't expect that little guy like you is really not that stupid." When Lin Yu heard what the old man said, he was also furious. "It seems that you want to use me to kill the Lord of the Netherworld so that you can seize the platform of reincarnation yourself. It's really a good plan." After hearing what Lin Yu said, the old man's eyes were full of excitement. At this time, he also nodded so heavily. "Ha ha ha, I didn't expect that you little guy is actually quite smart. But what can you do even so? Lao Ju has just advised you. If you just back out, then I can spare your life, but if you are stubborn and insist on going down this road, then I will only be able to help you." Lin Yu directly summoned the Chaos Sword into his hand, and at this moment, the whole world was also filled with flying sand and rocks. The formation spirit in the void quietly moved towards Lin Yu's head. With such a gathering, the entire power of Netherworld sterilization seemed to be gathered in this place at this moment. It gives people a feeling of terror, and the gloominess makes people feel cold. At this time, he suddenly slashed towards the old man. Lin Yu was extremely fast, but although the old man seemed to be very slow, he was always able to block Lin Yu every time. Language attack. At this time, something strange flashed in Lin Yu's eyes. The old man's defense could be described as airtight. After Lin Yu saw this scene, his eyes were full of disbelief. At this time, he couldn't help but frown slightly. "Interesting, it's really interesting. Your technique is very strange. Heaven and earth are one, and at the beginning of creation, all things are not born, and the soul is immortal. This is the way of heaven. How can you ordinary people understand it? So retreat obediently. This is the best thing for you. A delicate figure in the distance stared directly at both parties. Immediately afterwards, several young men and women came and ducked to the beautiful woman's side. Rura, what's wrong? Why don't you move forward? If you look closer, you can see more clearly. A man came to Linrura. At this time, Linrura turned her head and glanced at the man, and then shook her head. Senior brother Chu, we can't go any further. The two of them are very powerful. If we go further, we may not be able to withstand just you both fighting. Obviously Chuyi didn't believe what Linrura said, he just waved his hand and said, at least I have a first-order chaos monster protecting me now. The two of them seem to have nothing more than the alien beasts around them, it's just chaos level. As long as you are by my side, Rura, there is no need to be afraid. The young girls around here were filled with envy after seeing this scene. At this moment, after hearing what Chuyi said, Linrura just shook her head and smiled. Senior brother Chu, it's better to be careful when sailing a 1,000-year ship, so senior brother Chu had better stay away. Chuyi just didn't believe in this evil, but at this moment, the aftermath of a sword energy struck from a distance and directly penetrated Chuyi's body, protecting energy, and then cut off one of his arms. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 289. At this time, Chuyi let out a scream like a slaughtering pig. Linrura stepped forward and quickly pulled Chuyi back. At this time, Linrura just lightly drew a curse seal, and then immediately afterwards, Chuyi's arm slowly grew out of his body. Linrura rolled her eyes at Chuyi angrily. I've already reminded you just now, why do you still insist on going your own way? At this time, Chuyi's eyes flashed with helplessness, and the corner of his mouth curled up into a bitter smile. I'm sorry Rura, it was all my fault just now. Linrura just sighed quietly. Hey, let's be careful for a while. The fight between the two of them is a fight between gods. We just need to watch it from a distance and gain some insights. Chuyi nodded heavily like this. Just after this moment, Lin Yu found a flaw in the old man's flaw, and then immediately threw the yang sword in his hand like this. The corner of the old man's mouth just curled up into a sneer, and a hint of ridicule flashed in his eyes. Little guy, it's better to lose your temper. If you can't calm down, then just suffer death. After the old man finished speaking, he turned to the side. With such a slight sideways turn, he directly avoided Lin Yu's blow. Holding the risk of one of his arms being cut off, he directly pointed the whisk in his hand towards Lin Yu. Yu's neck was waved like this. After Lin Yu saw this scene, his expression suddenly changed. At this time, it was already too late for him to dodge. The whisk directly pierced Lin Yu's shoulder. At this time, Lin Yu let out a muffled groan, and then used the strength of the whisk to retreat suddenly backwards. Obviously, the old man never expected that his perfect blow would not take Lin Yu's life in the end. The old man's eyes were staring straight at Lin Yu, with a bit of gloominess flashing in his eyes. Little guy, you are quite capable, but even so, what can I do? What if I want to kill you, you will still die. After the old man finished speaking, he suddenly rushed towards Lin Yu again. Lin Yu bit the tip of his tongue, and then spit out a drop of blood in his palm. At this moment, the green bull and white tiger above the void were fighting hard. Lin Yu gritted his teeth, as if he had made some important decision. At this time, a soul cone was forcibly condensed in his palm. When the old man arrived, he thrust the soul cone toward the old man's sea of consciousness and suddenly thrust it through. The old man let out a scream like a slaughtering pig, and then his whole aura became much weaker than before. The green bull seemed to be aware of the old man's pain. He suddenly used his horns to push away the white tiger, and then rushed towards the old man. In the blink of an eye, the green bull had already arrived at the old man's side. The green bull carried it on its back, and the old man suddenly plundered towards the west. At this time, Lin Yu's aura was somewhat unstable, so he did not choose to pursue him at this time. The white tiger came to Lin Yu's side, with a hint of solemnity flashing in his eyes. "This guy is scary." This was the first time Lin Yu heard White Tiger commenting on a strange beast like this, but even he had to admit that this green bull was just like the undefeated god of war, as towering as a mountain. No matter how the white tiger attacked, it could not hurt him in the end. "I won't get this white tiger at all." Lin Yu's lips curved into a bitter smile. "Oh, I really don't know who this guy is and why he would do this. It's better to be careful. Find what you're looking for quickly and leave quickly. This is a place of right and wrong. Especially after you kill the Lord of the Netherworld, I'm afraid the people who want to come here to get a share of the pie will be more and more are coming." Lin Yu knew that what Bai Hu said was indeed true, so at this time he nodded slightly. "It doesn't matter, I know all these and have a sense of proportion, so you don't need to worry." Bai Hu opened his mouth, as if he wanted to say something, but with Kendo Lin Yu's appearance, he swallowed back the words that had already reached his lips. And in this distance, the green bull stopped and turned around, glanced at the old man, with a somewhat complicated meaning in his eyes, and then frowned slightly. "The sword that boy used just now is extraordinary, and the move you used at the end is also extraordinary. In my opinion, it is best to lie dormant for a while and wait for the group of people to wear down this boy. This is the safest move." After the old man heard what King Yu said, he nodded slightly. "What you said may be true, but I always feel that there is a big secret hidden in this kid. Maybe this time, he is or the biggest gain is not necessarily the same." After King Yu heard what the old man said, he nodded slightly and smiled. "Maybe it's true, but all this is just speculation between the two of us. Everything has to be seen. It will happen in a few days. The little guy's fighting performance with that group of people is outstanding." But at this moment, a burst of sound of breaking through the sky suddenly sounded in the distance, and then followed by a burst of sound of breaking through the sky, coming from far and near. This seemed to be a sword energy, which seemed to be sent by Lin Yu just now. That sword energy. There was a bit of fierceness in the old man's eyes. Although the sword energy was not strong, it was extremely insulting. There was a gloomy meaning in the corners of the old man's eyes and brows. At this time, the old man clenched his fists and gritted his teeth, and the killing intent on his body was quietly revealed. "This little guy, if I don't kill him this time, it will be hard to eliminate the hatred in my heart." King Yu just smiled. "There will be a chance, this little guy won't live long." King Yu turned his head, glanced at the old man, and then spoke unhurriedly. "But I'm still worried. Seeing that little guy like this, if he still has a trump card in his hand, even if he takes 10,000 steps back, he doesn't have any trump cards in his hand. That white tiger is not a kind person either." At this time, Lin Yu saw the old man running away, and the mockery at the corner of his King Yu mouth began to become more and more obvious. At this time, he just spread his eyes lightly like this. He spread his hands and said, "I originally thought this old guy had some abilities, but now it seems like nothing more than that. It's simply not worth mentioning." At this time, after Bai Hu heard what Lin Yu said, he couldn't help but frown slightly. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 290. I always feel that this old guy must have some conspiracy. I don't think he will give up so easily. As Bai Hu spoke, he turned his head and glanced in Lin Yu's direction, with a hint of solemnity flashing between his eyes and brows. At this time, after Lin Yu heard Bai Hu say this, a sneer suddenly appeared on the corner of his mouth. At this time, he saw him shaking his head, and then gently spreading his hands. "Some things are hard to talk about, What do you think? At this time, Baihu saw Lin Yu like this, and there was a bit of worry in his eyes. Although you killed the Lord of the Netherworld, they are now afraid of the Lord of the Netherworld, but they are not afraid of you. Baihu's eyes were staring straight at Lin Yu. Lin Yu was slightly startled at first, but after a moment, he seemed to have remembered something, and he just spread his hands and smiled gently. What you said may be true, but none of this matters now. And at this moment, an extremely powerful force came out, and suddenly rushed towards Lin Yu's face. The force was powerful and fierce. When Lin Yu felt the power of his inner bones, his face turned pale. It suddenly became ugly. At this moment, the white tiger suddenly flew forward and stood in front of Lin Yu. Finally, Lin Yu saw an old man sitting on the excited body, suddenly flying towards him. The old man was extremely fast, and he was already here almost in an instant. In front of Lin Yu. At this time, the old man stared directly at Lin Yu. I want to take a closer look to see if this little guy who can kill the Lord of the Netherworld has 3 heads and 6 arms. After Lin Yu heard what the man said, a bit of coldness flashed in his eyes. At this time, he also had a bit of a sneer on the corner of his mouth. 3 heads and 6 arms are not long, but my fists, it might taste good. You can try it. When the man heard Lin Yu say this, his face suddenly froze, and then he turned his head, staring directly at the killing intent in Lin Yu, and even more like this quietly emerged. Boy, what do you mean by this? It seems that you are very unconvinced. In this case, it is indeed time for me to teach you a lesson. After the man finished speaking, he suddenly rushed towards Lin Yu. At this moment, the man's speed was extremely fast. In just a moment, he had already flashed in front of Lin Yu. At this time, he waved his fist and suddenly hit Lin Yu's body directly. At this moment, Lin Yu just turned slightly to avoid the old man's blow, and then turned back without saying a word, just so directly, and kicked the old man away. Go out. In the end, the old man fell heavily to the ground, and a mouthful of blood spurted out from his mouth. Originally, Baihu wanted to take action for Lin Yu, but at this moment, Lin Yu just gently stopped the white tiger, with a sneer on the corner of his mouth. It's very interesting, since you want to ask for trouble, then if I don't help you, it will be hard to explain. After Lin Yu finished speaking, he suddenly rushed towards the man, and then gave the man a heavy elbow blow on his abdomen. But at this moment, when Lin Yu's wrist came into contact with the guy's lower abdomen, Lin Yu felt a strong suction force, as if he wanted to completely suck his arm. At this time, his expression turned slightly. After sinking, a somewhat gloomy look flashed in his eyes. The man suddenly smiled. How's it going, little guy? Are you satisfied this time? Lin Yu forcibly withdrew his hand, but the man just punched Lin Yu in the chest. At this time, Lin Yu moved backwards one after another, and only after taking several steps back was it regarded as forced. Stabilizing his figure. Okay, very good, I'm quite capable. The old man laughed like this, ha ha ha, since you think your skills are not as good as mine, then quickly hand over what you got from the Lord of the Netherworld. Only now did Lin Yu finally understand the old guy's purpose. At this moment, he suddenly smiled. Hand it over? Hand it over for what? After hearing what Lin Yu said, the man's face suddenly turned ugly. His eyes were firmly fixed on Lin Yu, and then he spoke so gently. The mysterious phoenix stepping on his feet. At this moment, the sound of a phoenix was heard, and the pressure of the king of birds invaded instantly. Alien Beast, Xianfeng Chaos Level 9, Level 49. Qualification, Alien, Intermediate. Life, 99999999999999999999999999999. Speed, 9999999999999999999. Defense, 99999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999. Skill, unknown. At this moment, after hearing the sound of the phoenix, Behu's eyes flashed with a bit of solemnity, and then he turned his head and glanced at Lin Yu. This guy's strength is extraordinary, it's better to be careful. At this moment, Behu was naturally not a vegetarian. She just let out a tiger roar, and at this time, the old man suddenly jumped up, and at this time, Xianfeng opened its bloody mouth and suddenly spit out a flame towards Lin Yu. Although Lin Yu was far away, she could still feel the terrifying temperature. At this time, her face was just like this, suddenly cold, and then she stared at the old man. Interesting, it's really interesting. At this moment, Behu was naturally unwilling to be outdone. The momentum of Behu's natural king's domain came out at the same time. At this moment, Xianfeng, after feeling the pressure of the natural king, actually lay directly in the air, as if kneeling down to worship his own king. After the old man saw this scene, his face suddenly became so ugly, and at this time he was heard to scold loudly, "Asshole, get up quickly, both of you beasts are chaos art beasts, you kneel down to him, aren't you afraid of losing face?" At this time, Xianfeng heard it, and after the old man said this, he struggled to stand up.